Hi all. These are generally conversations between adults after the children have left the table. The language can be spicy and the subjects can get saucy. So if you're ready, this is the Southern Fork. Unscripted kitchen chats and also studio chats with some of the most interesting voices in the culinary South. I'm Stephanie Burt, a food and beverage writer based in Charleston, South Carolina, who travels with her fork to write for a variety of publications, from magazines you might have on your coffee table to the website you love to visit for your favorite recipes. And I'm inviting you to come behind the scenes with me to get to know the people who make this Southern culinary landscape so special. I'm always hungry for the next bite, thirsty for that next sip, and ready for the next conversation. Let's dig in. The Southern Fork is sponsored by Smithy Ironware. Smithy has been a supporter of this show for so long, you might not realize how much their line of cookware has grown in the past couple of years. In addition to a range of cast iron skillets, including my beloved number 12 skillet, Smithy recently launched a new carbon steel skillet that's hand-forged by blacksmiths on the old Charleston Naval Base. And then there's the new Dutch oven, which is a thing of beauty. Featuring the only fully polished cast iron interior in the industry and a tight-fitting lid with a signature brass knob, it's perfect for braising, roasting, frying, and more. And if you like to get outside this time of year, it's also a welcome addition to any alfresco setup. During these unprecedented times, cooking is a welcome source of constancy and comfort that, however small, makes life a little bit better. Something we could all use an extra helping of right about now. Check out the full line of Smithy Ironware at smithy.com. That's Smithy with an EY.com. And remember that something as well made as a Smithy is an heirloom meant for everyday enjoyment. Use it well, and you can use it for life. Today, listeners, I'm hoping that we can trust each other to look at something that we'd often rather not. Right now, one of the main conversations in America around food is about the cracks and the fault lines in the meat industry, and by extension, the idea that while it's hard and illness is an epidemic, we must force workers by decree to keep working. This assumes the validity of the system. And I'm about to suggest that what we're missing is the idea of questioning things that have become institutionalized. I also know that it's overwhelming to look at ideas we have around it if we have no solutions. But we do have places to begin to explore solutions. So I've enlisted farmer, butcher, author, and teacher Meredith Leigh to help us have a discussion. Her Ethical Meat Handbook is in its second edition, and if you've chosen to consume meat, then Meredith's exploration and guidance of our relationship to eating animals is sensible and approachable. And she wants to help you begin to take your power back when it comes to being able to feed you and your family. Welcome to the Southern Fork, Meredith.
Oh, hi. Thanks for having me.
Well, remotely, which is very unusual for me here at the Southern Fork, but I am in my small house in Charleston, South Carolina, and you are in?
My house in Asheville, North Carolina.
And I can hear dogs and children in the background.
Yes. We are a very full
Yes.
house.
Well, I'm so excited to speak with you today because we had actually been working on some plans to chat later this season, but with what's really come to light here, I felt like it was really important for us to go ahead and chat today.
Sure.
Because I think that, one, you're an excellent writer. This
Thank you.
book, The Ethical Meat Handbook, is very engaging for having pictures of butchering in it.
Thank you.
It's very personal to you. And I just really like the consistent voice and the honesty in it. So I really just wanted to kind of jump right into this discussion because food systems have been something that has been a passion of mine to write about and research for a long time, but they haven't really been very interesting to readers or the public until now.
Yes,
Right?
That's right.
What are your first takes on what we're really dealing with right now with this pandemic and the shift in especially meat food systems? We've got the first meat shortages really that are happening right now.
Yes. So I mean, my brain is going a million miles a minute with all of this because it's sort of everything I've been talking about for my career. Just how the systems by which we get our food are really not set up in an ideal way to begin with. So they're very fragile to outside tremors, shall we say. And the coronavirus has been a giant tremor that has really laid bare the system. And so that's kind of the first thing is, I'm really attempting to explain to people why the system has been so sensitive to this and what it means economically, what it means for land and animals, as well as for people and their diets and their health. So that's already a lot. And then, what we do about it is like sort of what comes next,
Right. I noticed specifically you were talking about poultry, which is specifically really the first blip that we are seeing. Not blip, but you get what I'm saying. Wrinkle,
I do.
I guess. And in your poultry chapter, you really talk about your disconnect with chickens and like that you just, you talk a little bit about the soul of the animal. And that really resonated with me because I have heard, just like you mentioned in the book, that you shouldn't ever name animals that you are going to eat, or you shouldn't have a connection with them. And it seems like that idea seems like it's really taken hold in the American culture psyche, because now we don't know what part of the chicken lands on what part of the animal. We have anesthetized it through styrofoam and taking off skin so people don't even see where hair or feathers were or fur. And then I know that chicken doesn't have fur, but cows do. And then we've removed the connection to the death of the animal into these factory farms. And so people are shocked to hear about the working conditions, but it's something that I've heard many, many people say, just don't tell me about it. So can you talk a little bit about how we deal with the soul of the animal? I mean, I'm just going to start out with the big guns. Let's just do it.
I love it. I love that everything that you're saying and the fact that we're going here right away. Because this is definitely one of my, I guess, favorite things to talk about, which sounds a little twisted, but, it's actually the opposite. So I think, one thing that you're speaking to is just this whole removal of, people from, the realities of food and nourishment. That, there's an equal amount of vibrant life as well as death in all foodways. It doesn't matter if you're talking about peanuts or, pork. It's just that, animals, it's so much easier for us to anthropomorphize animals, right? To project our own feelings onto them because they bleed blood like we do. They have eyelashes. They're cute,
Right.
And I think
eyelashes
that
make a big difference, right?
Oh, totally.
Yeah, eyelashes.
Big eyelash
Yeah.
baby calves and, things are, and furry things and soft things, things that humans associate with, things besides food. It's just a little bit different for people to remove themselves. But I think also just the industrialization of food in general has really closed people's eyes to the fact that all manners of acquiring, nutrition are in some way, shall we say, morally dangerous. You don't
Right.
plow up a field of wheat without taking lives, and you don't, harvest cattle without taking lives. And I mean, I think what's interesting is the other aspect of that is that the separation that we insist on having between life and death. And life is light and all things bright, and death is, violent and all things bad, but we don't necessarily tend to talk about how one can't really exist without the other.
Absolutely.
And also,
it's that idea of the shadow, right?
Right. And also that, that it should be behind closed doors, or it should be soulless, if it involves death, when in fact, the more soul and the more consciousness and the more mindfulness and the more prepared we are emotionally when we face death, then the richer we find our living experience. So I think, there's just been this slow degeneration of the connectedness that, to farmers and people who face it on a daily basis, it's very obvious. But as you said,
Right.
to folks who are accustomed to buying their food from a grocery store, it's easy to understand why it feels more convenient to check out of that life cycle than it is to check in.
And when we're talking about disconnect, I think we are going to slide here into this use of your dollars, right? And I don't know if you've watched The Good Place. Did you watch that show?
No, I haven't.
On television recently. It was about how everything has so many choices that it's really difficult to choose. And we just say, I can't choose, I can choose to eat local eggs, but I'm going to still buy from Amazon, that kind of thing. People are making these choices all the time with these overwhelming choices. So we keep talking about that, but we're not talking about, or at least most of us aren't, you do some in your book, about the idea that once you decide that, yes, this is important and I want to remove myself from the factory farms system and start purchasing more sustainable, ethically harvested meat and grown meat, a lot of people don't have that option. It becomes it can slide into being an elitist conversation. We say, well, it's just so expensive, but instead of asking, why is that so expensive? Maybe we should be, why we make so little to afford it.
Right. Well, it's a multi-tiered conversation. Why isn't it accessible to everybody? Why is food that is good and whole somehow elite and gourmet, and food that is empty and processed somehow accessible and approachable? That's totally backward, but it is the situation that we're in. And meat is indeed one of the products that people consume on a daily basis that has that problem. Has the largest share of that problem. I would say that within the movement to get better food on people's plates, meat and dairy have had, are sort of infamous for being, considered, only available in marginal circles. Yeah. And also kind of at the eye of the storm in terms of environmental suspicion and all kinds of things, whereas vegetables have not that there isn't a host of issues with getting fresh fruits and veggies to people and, farming those in a way that's responsible, but it's just meat is immediately controversial. in that way. And so I think, there's kind of two sides to the work that I've been doing. And one side is, yes, let's support the commerce that has developed out of our desire to have better meat. But let's also acknowledge that that will only make that meat available to people who have means. So let's also figure out how to cooperate, and and get meat to people, through unconventional networks that will start to open, pathways to ethical meat becoming more mainstream. And really that has been the more radical side of the work that I've done. But in the face of COVID, it suddenly doesn't seem so radical to people anymore, which is really fascinating.
Right. It's kind of interesting. Yes. I mean, I'm a bioregionalist. I think it took me a while to figure that out, but the idea of local and keeping that building community, adding to the soil of the community and, keeping your dollars in and that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden it feels like everybody gets that in a way that I haven't expected. But one of the ways that has allowed me with limited means, I mean, in case anyone is listening, I want to dissuade you from going into freelance podcasting and freelance writing. It is not the, to use the pun for the meat episode, the cash cow that you think it's going to be.
Go.
So I had to really decide where my money is going to go researching and writing about this. And one of the ways that I have been able to change my household food system is by using the food better. You talk about the American selective use of food resources. And I was wondering if you could talk about that. If you're choosing to eat meat or you're choosing to buy something, that's a choice. But then there's also a choice of how to use it, correct?
Right. I mean, it's such a massive educational,
I know we're touching on a lot of huge things.
There's a massive educational need, basically, that, we, and I want to be really clear that it's not a blame game and it's not a, everybody needs to shoulder this responsibility and feel great shame if they don't, succeed at making this food system better. Because, one of the things that I try to make really clear in my work is that it's all sort of institutionalized to appear as though we have tons and tons of options, like you said earlier. But the fact of the matter is that the options that we have, we may have 75 different brands to choose from, for example, but the products that those brands are offering are really a very narrow segment of what, we might be able to utilize in our diets and in our kitchens. Especially when it comes to whole food. And so when we talk about buying differently, cooking differently, and eating different things, which are basically like the three tenets of the home economy, like changing the home food economy that are in the book, it's just about, recognizing that our culture has sort of institutionalized this quick convenience attitude about eating. And as such, we tend to seek out or habitually seek out products that will fit into like a little round peg into that hole. But if we start looking at, the whole animal, for example, we start to understand that, if we are going to honor the animal that we are eating, that, not every single muscle from that animal fits into that quick convenience culture type of eating.
Right.
And so, the way the industry has dealt with that is through processed foods. But on the home scale, if you're trying to avoid processed foods and eat more whole, you've got to use your meat and start thinking about meat on your plate in a different way. So that's like eating less meat overall. It's letting meat nuance other foods on the plate rather than taking center stage. And it's also learning some of those slow, low cooking techniques like braising, curing, brining meats instead of expecting to be able to slap everything on the grill or fry it up quickly in a frying pan.
Right, right. So it's more connection to that food and feeding yourself and your family and cooking and that three-pronged approach, not just
That's right.
eating. That's really been something that I've learned through my family. When did that first click for you that they were interconnected like that? Because you didn't grow up on a farm.
No, I didn't.
Did you?
And actually, food was a source of stress in my young life. I was raised by a single mother and, very meager income. And, we ate what we could, like most people in America who don't have the privilege to cherry pick what they eat or where they buy their food. And I think actually, if I'm being super honest, it was in college when I was in the shared dorm kitchen and I was watching a fellow student prepare food for herself. And the things that she was selecting were so much healthier and more whole than the things I was fixing for myself. And I remember just taking note of that and really noticing that a peer of mine was coming at feeding her body in this completely different way. And that is when I first started asking questions of myself, like, what are you doing when you eat? And what is the purpose of it?
Right.
And how does it make you feel? And if you want to change the answers to those questions, what does that need to look like? And then I think, further from that, like I started out in college as a creative writing major, but I ended up being in the environmental science department and, graduating with a degree in agriculture. And the reason for that was because I did some volunteer work at a school garden. And it was the first gardening I'd ever done in my life, but watching the transformation of a seed to a plant of, rock hard soil to pliable soil that can produce food. That was what I wanted to write about. And so, I decided that, to change my major, but in the course of watching food production, it really took that, watching that student cook was one level of it, but another level of it was really getting down at the farm level and seeing, what an incredible situation food production is and how political it is and how environmental it is. And it really just lit me up in every way.
Well, I get that. And, because I have a master's in American Lit and I'm right here in the food world talking about this stuff. So I'm right there. It's what lit me up as well. So
awesome.
When we talk about that idea of being able to cherry pick, and it really goes back to that idea of being mindful, but also at the same time, not being dogmatic, because it's not just financial ways or the idea that all the brands are really compressed into certain kinds of food. It's also the idea that if you are trying to do this, it takes a lot of time. Like you can't just go to one place. And one of the ways to make that a little bit easier is to plant one or two things that you actually eat so you can have those things. If you're urban, you can plant some tomatoes or a cucumber. But meat, I live in a, pretty suburban neighborhood and there are lots of chickens here.
Right.
How do we go to that space? How do we start to open up to the idea of animal husbandry as a food source as well? Because we've lost that. We had it, but we don't have it.
That's right. Well, I think to the first point you made, it's not just financial and that it takes a lot of time and energy and whatever brings you to it might be, there's so many pieces to the puzzle of making food, putting food more into the hands of people rather than corporations, that there are a million different entry points for why you might come into it. Maybe your child has really bad allergies and that's your wake up call. Maybe you are suffering a terminal illness and that your doctor says you need to clean up your diet. Maybe you are aghast at the way animals are treated in the industrial livestock, complex, and that's your entry point. But, regardless of what it is, like, take that one end and walk with it. You know what I mean? Like, I think, so for me, like if people say, well, I'm really strapped for money. And so what I started doing was going to Costco and buying like 15 chickens at a time. And so my goal in coming to you, Meredith, is learning how to make chicken sausage, and that's all this lady wants to do. In a perfect world, she's not getting those chickens from Costco. You know what I mean? But at the same time, I'm like, I will definitely help.
She's starting somewhere.
Yeah,
right.
You're starting somewhere. You're doing something. You're taking something into your own hands, and especially if somebody says, I didn't think that this was something I could do. I didn't have the confidence, or I didn't believe that it was important, but now I do. Then it's like, great, that it's same for farmers. It's like, if what you need to do to get into farming is, X or Y, we need farmers, do it, So yes, ideally every farmer would be able to make these independent, decentralized, totally clean choices. But the fact of the matter is we're mired up in a system where, not everybody has that freedom of choice. So whatever entry point is possible is good. And I think that was a little bit of like a rabbit trail off of your original question.
No,
I do want to speak to that as well. Like people in super limited resource rural areas, or even like super overpopulated, non-farming urban areas, how do folks like that check into this effort? And I think, there's multiple ways. Like maybe you're going about getting your meat from the same places that you've always gotten your meat. If COVID hasn't caused those shortages, then maybe you can get into starting to learn some different cooking techniques. Like what about trying to make confit for the first time in your life? The other thing is maybe you're in a super urban area and you want to work on getting meat directly from a farmer that is in decently close proximity to you. There are ways to do that, even if you don't live in a neighborhood where there's a farmer's market. You may be able to take to the internet and find, a group of people who are wanting the same thing. And together, the power in numbers can help you afford and share the labor of transporting that meat or storing that meat or whatever it may be that you feel limited in your ability to do. I think another thing that coronavirus is showing everybody is that there still is the possibility for community and cooperation, despite the fact that people are, required to stay distant from each other.
Right.
And so that's a couple things that I write about in the book. Like, what if you don't have a car? What if what if you don't have income? Like, how can you, I just had a huge conversation with a guy on Instagram the other day he was like, I'm on welfare, but like, I want to learn how to butcher. And I was like, well, why don't you go offer your services to some people who have money? And maybe the way that you pay into the arrangement is through your labor. And the way that the people who don't want to cut meat pay into it is with their cash money. There's several different ways that people are getting creative in light of what we're facing right now to break down barriers and get what they need.
I love it. Okay. We were going to have more conversations. I am sure of it. I hope. Anyway, if I haven't scared you by starting out discussing souls of animals.
No, this is great.
Every podcast, I ask these 4 questions, and I'd love to ask some of you, since I've needed your expertise more than your personal story today, but I want to know, you've been in this business, you've been in this this really, I would say, professional research for decades. So what is making you hungry?
Well, I think what continues to make me hungry over and over again is being around food on a farm, like living expressions of the plants and animals that make up the food that we eat. There's nothing more inspiring to me than walking in a field of, plants or being in the presence of living animals and really feeling that system that is sort of vibrant and regenerative. The smells and the sensory experience, and I mean, chefs understand this because, farm to table chefs are endlessly inspired by, the expressions of plants as they grow. And, it can totally, the way you use fennel can change from the time that it's a baby plant to its flower. And so I think that that's sort of the same principle. It's like walking around in the world and experiencing food as it is, rather than just as a finished product is probably what makes me most hungry.
Well, food writers get that too. Sometimes they get really excited when they go to farms and want to call everybody, and other people don't seem to.
Well, I wish really that everybody could have that experience. It's like not everybody gets that, which is a shame.
I know. A farmer's market is a great place to start, though.
That's true.
If you can find one. It's a great place to get just excited about being surrounded by raw product. And then you can kind of take it from there. Okay. You've created this job, which has had myriad faces over the years, from farming to charcuterie to writing to teaching. What is one aspect of your calling or profession that really fits like a puzzle piece with an aspect of your personality? And that's Petunia in the background jiggling with my Boston Terrier who's sitting next to me and decides to
take part in the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. She's like, I'm done with this. We're done.
That's a great question. I would say that, I've always been a poet and a writer. And I think that the way that food is so metaphorical, to the lived experience is the aspect of my job that best fits with my personality, because I love the ability to use cooking and food and eating as a lens to connect people to their world, and not the made up world of like media and, what am I going to wear today? But like, the real raw experience, emotional experience of being a human animal on the earth. And so
a creature, as Wendell Berry says, right?
Creature.
I love that. What keeps you up at night?
Oh gosh, what keeps me up at night? Well, I guess right now, most presently, I worry. I'm worried about people and I'm worried about, land, and I'm worried about systems. I am grateful for this opportunity for people to see that there is a framework of bioregional or community or local-ish food, that people who have had the ability to be working on that for the last, many decades, I'm grateful that there is that framework. But I also know that as somebody who's been in that movement for a really long time, that it's not perfect and it's not scaled to help everybody. And it needs a lot of work. And so what keeps me up at night is how to make it, stronger, how to help it endure through the COVID crisis, and how to help people understand how it can become meaningful in their lives and helpful to them, during this time of crisis, I think is just a constant head scratcher for me.
Yeah. A 2 a.m. thought.
Yes,
for sure. Okay. So I don't talk about it beyond the Southern Fork, but I have a magic picnic basket And I also can time travel. So despite those two things, I still haven't figured out to have a large savings account. But I I can conscript any chef to make food. I can go back in time to get something from one of your ancestors. I can cook a little bit and source. So if you had a dream meal, what would be in that picnic basket for you?
Oh my gosh, that's a really hard question. That's tough for me. I eat anything. I guess what I really want is some pickles from Kyoto, Japan, from Pickle Street. I went to Kyoto, Japan a long time ago, but I was not aware of the pickles when I was there. And so I missed it. So if you really have this magic basket, I can go get them. Every vendor on Pickle Street.
Yes, that sounds great.
And then just some various, I'm a big time like snacker, like crackers and cheese and charcuterie and pickles. So I would probably just want to put together, a little spread in the grass with my pickles from Japan and sample all that.
Well, that sounds really great, Meredith. I would be happy to go back to Japan to get pickles. That is my pleasure.
Would. Yeah.
So
thank you.
I will eat all of the things and I will just bring you pickles. Well, if people want to learn more about Meredith Leigh and the Ethical Meat Handbook, you can go to thesouthernfork.com. I am going to have images there, like I always do, with links. And of course, in the books from the show tab, we're going to have this handbook. It's a lot more than just discussions of food systems. She actually has a big section on recipes for those of you that are interested. She also has how to make charcuterie and actually how to break down meat, how to break down animals and process them, butcher them. And so if you eye that, rack of ribs in the grocery store, but are a little intimidated, if you grab this book, Meredith can really help you break that down. So thank you so much for dealing with an app to talk with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Hello and welcome to Talking with My Mouthful. Everybody is on the internet suggesting things to watch on television, and I haven't done it yet, so I'm going to do it today. You heard me mention in this discussion previously with Meredith about a television show called The Good Place, and that's my suggestion. Now, I've watched every episode of this show. I think it's from NBC, and it stars Kristen Bell and Ted Danson, and it's hilarious, and it also talks about philosophy. It's also so spot on. As a writer nerd, man, the writing is really good. The episodes are short. A lot of stuff is just so silly, which is good to see right now or really anytime. And so that's my suggestion. If you're looking for something tonight to watch, I would suggest The Good Place. You've been listening to The Southern Fork. I can't wait to bring you more culinary conversations, but in the meantime, I have one question. Are you gonna eat all that?